Why children's rights? Yeah? Well, the answer to that question is actually more complex than you might think. And I start with a fairly obvious, deceptively obvious statement that children are human. Of course they're human. But when we think about human rights, when it comes to human rights, children are very often not seen. Even when we recognise the human rights of adults, even when we say that the human rights that people enjoy simply by virtue of being human are enjoyed by everybody from birth, the focus in practice on the implementation and the assertion of those rights is on adults who are politically capable, mature. Children very often seen as the product of their parents in the private sphere, represented by their parents, by the family, and too immature to exercise rights on their own account. And that's all very well, as long as the family works well, as long as the parents work, the parental care is good. It works well most of the time. But we know, of course, that that's not always the case. There are children who are without parental care, children whose parents who are separated from their parents, orphaned children, children whose parents, for whatever reason, can't look after them or won't look after them. Children afflicted by poverty, destitution, by armed conflict, children in extreme circumstances in their lives. For those children, rights become the language in which the moral obligation to support and provide care and nurture for all the world's children translated into a legal obligation on governments to ensure that that happens. And this is essentially what the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child does. If we look at the 100 years of, we can say 100 years movement on children's rights globally, if we look back to the beginnings of the great champions of children's rights like Eglantine Jebb, who founded Save the Children back in almost exactly 100 years ago. There we see the moral imperative to assist children, as it happens at that time, afflicted by conflict in the Balkans in wartime, then being translated, because of the clear inadequacy of that mere charitable effort at relief, being translated into an assertion of rights, that we should claim rights for the children to have the basic necessities and the recognition that they need in order to survive and to prosper even in difficult times. And eventually we get the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child that brought together that notion, along with many other ideas and thoughts that come from the mainstream, if you like, of human rights. And we have our Convention on the Rights of the Child ratified by almost every country in the world. So in short, children's rights, because children are human, they are human beings with particular vulnerabilities and with particular needs, but it's for the recognition of the humanity of children and for the protection of children and the conditions of childhood.
Whilst the Observatory was formed in 2012, it's arguable there's never been a greater need for a Wales Observatory. As we've seen devolution accelerating, the importance of children's rights across Wales certainly has increased at the same time. And currently we have a very pro-child rights legislative framework in Wales, from pivotal legislation like the Rights of Children and Young Persons Measure of 2011, all the way across to Future Generations Wales Act of 2015. And all of those acts of the Assembly and other legislative and policy instruments, what they are telling us is that children's rights matter so very much in Wales. But what we also need is not just legislation and policy, we need individuals to take forward and advocate for change in Wales. And this is where the Observatory can play a really pivotal role. So here we have in Swansea and also in Bangor, academics who work with our own policy and operational networks to understand children's rights and to place them in a proper context, and also to fight for them in contemporary Welsh society. Reflecting on my own role and experience of the Observatory, one thing that's become very clear to me, and which is really powerful, is the Observatory's capacity to reach out and to collaborate with different people across Wales. Thinking of the work I've done, certainly with schools, work that my colleagues like Jane Williams and Helen Dale have done in Llais Bach, one of the things that's been really important is engaging those young people, those children, about which children's rights matter so very much in the very process of articulating what those rights mean, creating change in policy and also in practice. I also think as well of advocacy at this point. The Observatory has created a powerful network across Wales of NGOs, of local authorities and the devolved government itself. And we've been able to influence change as we move forward in Wales. That's critical. But we also come at it as well from an academic perspective, which is that we are evidence-based and we're always seeking solutions to help government and to help those who make children's rights real, make them effective and embedded as well.
Our work at the Observatory is based on 3 pillars. The first of these is to carry out research on children's international human rights. This research is often subject or discipline specific. For example, in relation to children's rights in the juvenile justice system or in relation to education. However, the Observatory is an interdisciplinary project, which means that our research often crosses disciplinary boundaries to provide new insights into children's rights issues. The second pillar of our work is embedding children's rights. This focuses on developing guidance and tools to support the implementation of children's rights through the work of government and public authorities. An example of our work in this area is the development of a children's rights approach and a child's rights impact assessment to enable government officials to take full account of children's rights in policy development. The third pillar of our work focuses on ensuring that governments and public authorities are properly accountable for meeting their obligations in relation to children's rights. This includes supporting strategic litigation, as well as engaging with processes which examine the implementation of children's rights by government, including examination by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Observatory members are academics based at Swansea University, as well as external affiliates who work in children's rights for civil society organisations or as independent researchers. The Observatory has strong links with the Children's Legal Centre Wales, which provides advice and advocacy, including policy advocacy, in support of children.
The Children's Legal Centre for Wales is a project based in the Observatory on Human Rights of Children at Swansea University. It responds to the accountability stream within the work of the Observatory. So we provide information and services to children and young people to educate them and inform them about the law in Wales and the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We came about as a result of research looking at the fact that children and young people in Wales needed more support to understand their rights and advice if they needed more information about their rights if they were in trouble. We carried out quite a lot of research, we visited other children's legal centres across the UK, and in light of the fact that areas of law that affect children and young people are becoming increasingly devolved in Wales, we decided that we needed a project that responded directly to the law in Wales for children and young people. The work of the Children's Legal Centre, predominantly for the first 5 years of our development, has been around developing information for children and young people in different areas of the law. So we have a website that we categorise information on the law in areas that relate to children and young people. So we've got at home, on the street, in school, rather than taking the law and saying this is the law, we come at it from the perspective of the young person. We also carry out special interest projects, so we're currently developing and updating some information for children who are seeking asylum, coming to us and seeking asylum. We've carried out projects in relation to sibling contact for children in foster care or in the care system. For children who are disabled, we've created information for them too. And the idea is that we provide information for children who need it at the point that they need the information in relation to the law. The other areas of work that we're currently developing is providing services. So we are developing an initial education advice service that's going to be based in the university and remotely and carried out by our Justice First Fellow, a training contract funded by the Legal Education Foundation. And we're also looking at the development of an app that helps children and young people who have been excluded unfairly from school, and we're doing that with the Legal Innovation Lab based at Swansea University. Our other area of work that we're looking at developing over the next 18 months is public legal education, so going out to youth groups, to school settings and providing information for children about the law in Wales. The Children's Legal Centre is based in the School of Law at Swansea University, and we received grant funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, as well as historical grant funding from the Paul Hamlin Foundation, the Legal Education Foundation and the Legal Education Research Network.
In Wales, we're really well placed to embed children's rights, with the Observatory sitting as representatives on many fora at the local level and at the national level, such as the Wales UNCRC Monitoring Group and the Welsh Government Children's Rights Advisory Group. So what does embedding mean? Well, embedding means that children's rights must be at the core of legislation, policy and practice. So with regards to law reform, the Observatory has been pivotal to and inspired the embedding of children's rights across a range of legislation in the Welsh context, from the landmark Rights of Children and Young Persons Wales Measure 2011, which places a duty on Welsh Government ministers to have due regard to the UNCRC, to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, to the Additional Learning Needs Act, and to the recent introduction of the new Curriculum and Assessment Act in 2021, which also incorporates the UNCRC. We have also actively campaigned with our partners to remove the defence of reasonable punishment, and are really pleased to say that we celebrated the removal of the defence on March the 21st of this year. We've also led critical and extensive research for the Welsh Government that recommends a distinctive approach in Wales to the full and direct incorporation of all human rights treaties, and have been advocating in particular for further legal enforceability of children's rights, which would mean that all public bodies would have to comply with the UNCRC. But the Observatory recognises that translating children's rights into law is not enough on its own. Consequently, we have been working with partners to translate children's rights into policy and practice. And one of the most significant pieces of work that has had far-reaching impact has been the development by the Observatory of a principled and practical model for translating children's rights into practice. This model was developed when Professor Simon Hoffman and myself were commissioned to produce a statement and guide for the Children's Commissioner for Wales in 2017. And we identified 5 children's rights principles best suited to drive the implementation of a children's rights approach. We also advised on practical ways of translating those principles into practice. And the Children's Commissioner for Wales has called the approach the right way, and it's been adopted by Welsh Government, by the Future Generations Commissioner and many other public bodies, from social care, health, education to law enforcement. And the Observatory, working with partners in health authorities, has developed a monitoring system to assess how far a children's rights approach has been translated into the practice of health services delivery. And also working with the Children's Hospital for Wales, we have also demonstrated how human rights treaties can be utilised to access the benefits of paediatric research. We're also leading work across the UK to embed children's rights into youth justice systems with our UK partners, with a particular focus on the importance of restorative justice. We're also undertaking research into the embedding of pupil participation into children's rights approaches to education. And as Wales is a world leader on the importance of future generations and sustainable development, we have been demonstrating the critical interconnections between children's rights, sustainable development and future generations. Finally, we recently conducted a large-scale piece of research for the European Network of Ombudspersons for Children to assess the impact of COVID-19 emergency legislation across 43 ENOC member states. And from the findings of this research, we developed a position statement on a children's rights approach to public emergencies. Again, we used the Observatory's children's rights approach model, and this position statement has been communicated to governments across Europe, but also ENOC themselves have communicated its importance to the Secretary General of the United Nations. So our work at the Observatory on embedding children's rights approaches is having far-reaching impacts from Wales to Europe and beyond.
So when we talk about human rights and research with children, Beasley et al. Defines 5 key characteristics. So respectful of children as partners in the research. So the children's participation must be meaningful in their own terms, so not just those directed by the researchers or the funding body who wishes to undertake the research. It has to be ethical, so the ethics are at the heart of the research and in practical and meaningful ways, so not just a tick box activity. Children must engage in the research voluntarily and must not be exploited through the research process. It has to be scientifically valid, so the data must be collected systematically using methods that can be justified and replicated. The research has to be robust, so wherever possible, combining both statistical and descriptive techniques. And last but not least, to prioritise that local knowledge with children. They are the experts in their own lives and they can produce their own insightful information based on their own experiences and opinions, not for other people to present that in research on their behalf.
Of course, the convention is to be read as a holistic whole, but certain articles of the UNCRC have special relevance to the right to be properly researched. Article 3. Children have the right to expect the highest possible standards of services from professionals who work with them, which implies high-quality scientific research. Article 12. Children have the right to express their opinions in matters concerning them. Article 13. Children have the right to express themselves in any way they wish, not limited to the verbal expressions used by adults. Article 36. Children have the right to be protected from all forms of exploitation, including being exploited through research processes and through the dissemination of information. Lleisia Bach Little Voices is a form of participatory action research, PAR, but has two special features that distinguish it from most of the PAR practices. Firstly, it's framed by the UNCRC as to the scope of projects, conduct of research, ethics and approach to impact. Adults' interactions with children in projects will respect, protect and promote the rights of the child. And within that UNCRC framework, secondly, it is child-led. Children decide what they will research, how they will do it, and who they will seek to involve. They decide how to present their results and recommendations. They decide whether and with whom to seek to bring about change. It is not research about or on children, but a way of supporting children to work together and with adults to identify issues, plan research, gather evidence, and to find and promote solutions that will give better effect to the UNCRC in practice. It's children as researchers. The UNCRC informs our methodology and the way in which we put it into practice. It also provides the framework for the conduct of each project. The method deploys 6 thematic stages. 1. The right approach in selecting the research question. 2. Choosing research methods and planning research. 3. Data collection and analysis. 4. Planning for age-inclusive co-production. 5. Follow-up with children. And 6. Age-inclusive co-production and future planning. Lleisia Bach ran for over 10 years and its key achievements were: we had the world's first report submitted from children under 11 to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child as part of the 5th periodic review. 600 children trained as researchers across 3 funded projects. Fed into local and national policy such as the Child Rights Inquiry, Welsh Government's Beyond Recycling campaign, school uniform and abolishment of reasonable chastisement. Children as researchers projects ranged from organ donation, education, politics and decision making, loneliness, terrorism, play, homelessness, adults' use of mobile phones and children's health.
Today, lleisiabach.org stands as a repository for the wealth of experiences and ideas generated over the children's projects.
If I could change just one thing, it actually wouldn't be some specific new piece of law reform or or some particular policy. It would be a change that I think can only happen gradually, but one which everybody needs to buy into. And that is about seeing children, recognising children, respecting children as human beings. And it sounds like a very, very simple thing, but we fail to do it so often. I think of one of the, another great hero of the story of children's rights, Janusz Korczak, the Polish educator and doctor who championed children's rights and indeed perished with the children in his care in the gas chambers of Treblinka. He left behind a legacy of great writing, including some wonderful children's literature, but a treatise that he wrote which has really stuck with me. It's called The Child's Right to Respect, and I think this underlies and underpins everything that we do and we think about in relation to children's rights. We have to respect children and the condition of childhood, respect children for the human beings and the citizens that they are, but also for the children that they are. So much flows from that, and so much becomes simple once that psychological or philosophical even position is really, really internalised.
One thing I would change in Wales as far as children's rights is concerned is certainly in the area of youth justice, ensuring that the rights of children are far better upheld. Wales has moved some way towards recognising children's rights, but we need to take that step further. And so through the Observatory, I'd like us to advocate for further change to ensure that children have the full range of rights that are articulated in the CRC, and hopefully use those rights to ensure that their needs and not their deeds are considered by criminal justice agencies, and also that we give them the support they need to become the best members of society they can.